Hello guys, it's me again, it's Bongi. So today, let's talk about steps when you are dealing with a dead motherboard, meaning when you are dealing with a laptop with no power at all. I've been getting calls, messages, WhatsApp messages, Telegram messages, and Instagram as well. A lot of people, they want to know and understand how do I repair laptops motherboard. Anyway guys, it's easy. Just follow these steps and you will be fine. Okay, step number one: when you are dealing with a laptop with no power, not turning on, not charging the battery, not doing anything, the first thing there that you need to check your charger. Check your charger, check your multimeter, and then you check your charger. Check if you do receive 19 volts or 20 volts on your charger. Most laptops it's 19 volts, but the Lenovo it's always 20 volts, of which it's okay. Even if you are using a 19 volts charger, it's gonna work fine, no issues. Step number two: what do? Every time after a DC in check, you'll find two MOSFETs, right? So what you do is you check the first MOSFET. The input obvious, it will be the 19 volts, but you check there. If you do get the 19 volts on the first input MOSFET, it means your charging port is fine. But if you are getting 0 volts, you need to check your DC in ports, your charging ports. All right, then we move on. Once you have the 19 volts on the first MOSFET, on the input of the first MOSFET, you move on, you check the output of the first MOSFET. All right, you check there, and if you do get the 19 volts, you move on on the second MOSFET. But if you get 0 volts on the output of the first MOSFET, you need to check for short. Check why you are getting 0 volts there. What you do is you check for short to ground. You check your multimeter and then you switch it to continuity mode. You check the continuity, if there is a continuity from that point to ground. If it's shorted to ground, your meter will beep. It means and ground, and that's positive, and that 19 volts or 20 volts, yeah, they are touching. But if there is no continuity, you have to check the gauge, see why that MOSFET is not allowing the 19 volts to jump to output. All right, I've seen a lot of people, they just use wires, they just jump the MOSFET, of which it's not a good thing. Okay, it's not a good thing. Those MOSFETs, they are being told by a charging chip to allow the 19 volts to move on or not. Their gates, okay guys, sorry about that. And then as I was saying, I just got disturbed, but anyway, I'm gonna continue where I left. So those two MOSFETs are being controlled by a charging chip. There is a chip that is responsible for charging the battery. So the chip can sense the DC in, it can tell whether every condition are met on the laptop, and then it will allow the 19 volts to pass those two MOSFETs. So every time when you get the 19 volts on the output of those two MOSFETs, you should check two things: check for short to ground, and check the gate, why the gate doesn't allow the power, doesn't allow the MOSFET to switch. But anyway, those the gates, normally you will see two resistors, or there will be a resistor there allowing dropping down the power or stepping up the power. But anyway, that's not the case. You shouldn't be worried about that. You can continue to jump the MOSFET, but it's not a good thing at all. I won't advise people to jump those MOSFETs at all. You can just follow my step or watch my videos and see how I do it. Anyway, after you have the 19 volts, you have to check your 3.3 volts and check your 5 volt section. The 3.3 and the 5 volts are being generated by the 19 volts. So it means it's a must that you must have the 19 volts, or otherwise you won't have any power rail. The 19 volts is the main power. You need the 19 volts to have all the other rails, the power rails. Okay, after the 19 volts, what do you check? You check the 3.3 and you check the 5 volts. The 3.3 is required on the power button. The power button itself, it needs the 3.3 volts. The power chip, it needs the 3.3 volts. A lot of things, they need the 3.3 volts. So the moment you connect the charger, you should check the BIOS chip on pin number 8. You should have the 3.3 volts always without pressing the power button. If you are missing the 3.3 volts there, go back to where the 3.3 volts is generated. Anyway, don't confuse this thing. Okay, on the new motherboard, on pin number 8 on the BIOS, you have 1.8 volts. Most of them, they use 1.8 volts. Okay, so that's why I advise you to check on the power button. The power button is always the 3.3 volts, even on the new machines. The power button is 3.3 volts, so you should check for 3.3 volts on the power button. All right, you will have the 3.3 volts there always. If you are missing the 3.3 volts, go back to where the 3.3 volts is being generated. Normally, there is a chip on the old board. There is a chip, one chip generates 3.3 volts and it generates 5 volts. Okay, it's responsible for 3.3 and 5 volts. But on the latest machines, they separated the 3.3 volts as well as the 5 volts, and they are no longer using the MOSFETs. They are using a single chip that is responsible for generating the 3.3 always, and there will be another chip for 5 volts always. So be careful there. I'm giving you some tips. And yeah, once you have the 3.3 volts, your machine should turn on. If it doesn't turn on, check the power button if it does trigger, meaning when you press the power button volts should drop from 3.3 volts back to 0 and then back to 3.3 volts, and then the machine will start. If it doesn't start, it's okay. You can go furthermore, check for shorts all over the board. Do a cold scanning. It's called the cold scanning, where you check for shorts everywhere. Don't confuse the shorted CPU. Check there, check everywhere, and you will be fine. Anyway, I'll do more of these videos. I'm just giving you some tips, and guys, please stay safe, and you know how much I love you, right? Cheers.